Today we're covering the triangle, but more importantly, how exactly to do it, how to make it more effective, and what can come from the triangle. I remember being a white belt and not understanding what leg goes where, which direction I turn, which body parts. There are many important details of the triangle, but I'm going to simplify everything. So make sure you stick with me till the end. Let's jump in. Now, before you can launch the triangle, his posture matters. If he's sitting back and up straight, he is out of range. And this is actually a great defense to the triangle. If you feel someone wanting to go for it, you just have to sit back and all of a sudden you're safe. Now, if my opponent's too far forward and he's leaning on my chest, again, he's too close and essentially he's not out of range, but he's not in range either. He's just too close for me to launch this. I want a nice medium ground. As you can see in this example, I can control my opponent's posture by using my abs and my legs. The movement I'm using here is very similar to like a hanging ab leg lift, where I'm using my lower abs along with my legs to curl his body weight forward. I can, in the same fashion, also extend him away if I need to. If you haven't practiced this yet, you should try it because it's surprisingly easy to control someone's posture using this movement. Now, once you have the desired posture, you can now initiate your drill. I want to take a second to give my sponsor, X Martial, a shout out. Now, I've been doing Jiu Jitsu a long time, almost a decade, 9 years. Aside from having great pricing on all their products, it's also very comfortable. It fits well. You want to look good when you're on the mats. You want to feel proud of the person that you've built and the way you put yourself together. And your no-gi attire definitely plays a part in that. I know if I go compete, I want to look my best. So if you want to look as good as me, and probably even better, go over to xmartial.com and grab yourself some gear. I can promise you that you won't be disappointed. All right, let's jump back to the video. I lay on my back and I have my partner sit in my guard. I grab both of his wrists with my hands. Now I punch one hand to his stomach. I then lift my hips like a leg lift and I throw my legs over his shoulder. This is where it can be a little confusing for newbies, and this is why this drill is gonna help you. It teaches you which leg goes where. So if I'm punching his left leg to his stomach, my same side leg, which would be my right leg, would go over that arm and land on top of his shoulder. That knee is touching his ear, which means my other leg is wedged up into his armpit. Okay, so that's step one of the triangle. You've been able to effectively set this up and you've got one arm in and one arm out. This is also the drill. So once you get this down, you then reset back to guard. Then you can punch his other arm and initiate the move in reverse. And you're gonna do this on repeat. You could say for 5 minutes as a warm up. You can also do it at the end of class as a warm down. If you have a partner at home that doesn't mind you doing this kind of thing on them, you can practice it at home. And just being able to get yourself to the triangle is half the battle. Most people don't understand how to even start this submission, how to initiate it. And if you can launch it, you can finish it. Now that you have your drill in place and you're starting to understand the functionality of at least initiating the triangle, let's talk about moving forward or progressing this movement. Now, once I have my legs in place with one leg over his shoulder with my knee next to his ear and my other leg wedged up into his armpit with both of my feet connected behind his head, I then need to pay attention to his isolated arm. I need to move his arm across my waist to my opposite side pocket. Essentially what this is doing is placing his tricep against my stomach. And sometimes in order to make this happen, I will have to extend him away with my hips so that I have room to move his arm across my stomach. Now, once I've moved his arm across and his tricep is facing my stomach, if I haven't curled him in already, this is a good time to do that. Now, from here, I immediately like to get one or both of my hands on the back of his head. I want you to think of your hands and feet being connected behind his head as a circuit. If I completely open the circuit, he will be able to sit up and away. So we never want to completely open this. At some point, I'm going to have to make adjustments and I'm gonna have to open my legs, which is why I need my hands on the back of his head, because I'm opening part of the circuit, but not all of it because my hands are there. So the next step now is to open part of the circuit by opening my feet. Once I open my feet, I keep one hand on the back of his head. Typically, this is the same side hand of the knee that's pressed up against his ear. Now that I have that hand on the back of his head and I'm keeping his posture broken with his face tight against my body, I then use my other hand to reach for my shin that's draped across his back. And really what I'm grabbing is the shin area that's just above above my ankle. I don't want to grab too high up on my shin, and I don't necessarily want to grab my foot because that's where my leg pit of my other leg is going. So the area just above your ankle where your shin is makes a great handle for this. Now, once I have that hand on my shin, I've effectively closed the entire circuit. Now, I still want to be mindful because if I let him pick his head up and he's able to look up, he's more likely be able to posture up, which then eventually turns into him standing and possibly slamming me on my back. I do see people let go of the head often when they get to this position because they have the leg closed up behind them. So this is a big reason why I like to keep my hand on the back of his head while I'm still locking this triangle up. Now, with my positioning locked on his upper body, I'm going to take my other free leg and drop my foot down to his hip. Once my foot is on his hip, I apply inward pressure that helps me rotate my body at an angle almost perpendicular to his. If I stay parallel to him, in line with him, it's going to be very difficult to lock the triangle up. And if I do happen to lock the triangle up, it's going to be less effective at actually choking him. This angle that I'm about to show you in the triangle is everything. You need to make sure you get this if you want this to be as effective as possible. So as you can see here, I'm pushing on the hip, creating my angle. This also helps me pull my foot of the ankle that I'm holding onto in front of his shoulder. I don't want to lock this up on top of his shoulder. I technically can, but if you want this to be effective, you want to get so much of an angle that it almost pulls your foot in front of his shoulder. Once we're here, I'm going to wrap the leg pit of my free leg that was pushing on his hip over the shoelace section of the foot that's draped across his back. Now, oftentimes I'll see new guys get to this position and they try to finish from here, and you can get the tap from here, no doubt, but there's a couple things that you can do to make this even more effective. I don't know if you've ever experienced a submission that was so tight it made your head feel like it was going to explode and your eyeballs come out of your face. These next details will do exactly that with the triangle. So once I have this completely locked up, I'm also going to be pinching my knees together, which is probably going to be difficult to see from the video, but pinching your knees together will make this a little bit more tight. I also like to put both of my hands on the back of his head and pull down. Pulling the head down puts even more closing pressure on the carotid arteries that we're already applying pressure to, making this more effective. Now, one detail I don't see a lot of people talk about is dorsiflexion of the foot that's across his back. So as you can see here, when I dorsiflex my foot, essentially it raises my foot up, raising my toes towards my kneecap. If you do this when your other leg is wrapped over the shoelace section of this foot, it makes this so much more tight. It is only a difference of a couple inches, but you have to remember that Jiu Jitsu is very much a battle of inches. If I get the opportunity to take out 2 more inches of slack on a submission or a choke that's already tight, I definitely will, because this is what provides that immediate tap, that head exploding, eye pounding pressure that makes you want to tap right away. This is where you get that. Now, if you put all of this together, your opponent has 2 choices: go to sleep or tap. And it's probably most of the time going to be tapping. Now, one thing that some of you are probably accidentally doing is locking the triangle up the wrong way, which technically isn't wrong if you're doing it for a reason. A lot of us can get confused at which leg goes across the back and which leg locks the foot. And sometimes you may have been in a situation, if you've been training for a little bit, where someone has big shoulders or you're just having a difficult time locking up the triangle because the angle is a little bit off, right? You have your knee up and over their shoulder next to their ear. You've got your other leg wedged up into their armpit. Your legs are closed behind his head. And for whatever reason, you can't turn the angle enough to get your hand to the ankle of the foot that's behind his back. So a technique that a lot of people will use on purpose to help collapse your opponent's shoulders and put them into a better position is locking the triangle up the wrong way. So the leg that's wedged up into the armpit can come across the back and you lock that ankle into the leg pit of the leg that was sitting on his shoulder. Now, you probably won't get a submission from here, but that's not really this movement's purpose. I will use this setup to help collapse my opponent's shoulders a little bit, help find my angle a little bit more effectively. And once I have this locked up, most of the time, I can then re-lock it the correct way much more easily. So once you can identify the correct way to do the triangle and also the wrong way to lock it up, you can use both of these to your advantage. One being to finish the submission and one being a setup to get back to the submission you had a hard time initiating. So because this is one of the first defenses to the triangle we learn, and it is typically a lot easier to learn this defense than the triangle itself, if you're a white belt and you're struggling to finish other white belts with the triangle, it's probably because your positioning is a little off or they're launching this defense. So as you can see here, I begin to lock up the triangle and my opponent puts both of his hands on the knee that's choking him, driving my knee to the ground and then applying forward pressure, which pries my legs open. Now there's a couple things we can do here to help find another triangle and even other submissions. In this first setup, you can see that as he drives my knee to the ground, I keep a very tight grip with my hand on my ankle. I also keep the triangle locked up. This is just added insurance because he's gonna drive forward and I know that's going to be difficult to hold. Once he drives that knee down to the mats, I raise my arm that's pressed into the mat. At the same time, I extend my hips back. As I'm extending my hips back, I'm able to press both of my hands into the mat, essentially walking myself backwards into a mounted triangle. Now, once you're in the mounted triangle, you should be able to finish this just by grabbing the back of his head, squeezing your knees together, and lifting his head up. But every now and then, you will find someone who's stubborn to finish like this, and that's totally fine. The arm is right there for one of the easiest arm bars ever. All you have to do is grab his wrist, keep his thumb pointed away from your hips, and hip in towards his elbow as you raise his arm up. This comes on really quick, so be careful with your partners. I mean, chokes are one thing, joint locks are another. You can really hurt someone badly with a joint lock, so make sure you're careful with this. But I recommend this arm bar. It's there, it's easy to take. Why not use it if you need it? Now, this next variation starts off similar, but ends in a very different way. As he begins to drive my knee to the ground, I open my legs, but also make sure I have my hand gripped on my shin nice and tight. From here, once he's got my leg pinned, I have to move very quickly. This is a transitional piece. This is not where I sit and hang out. I immediately want to utilize my arm that's against the mat as a frame. So as you can see here, I frame off my elbow, which helps me corkscrew my hips around his body so that my belly button is facing his shoulder. In order to do this, you will have to loosen the grip of your leg that's wrapped around his neck. If you're gripping too tight with this, the corkscrew will be very difficult. You need to do yourself a favor and loosen that grip right now, right? You don't need to choke him right here. In fact, the choke isn't even there. In order to get back to a position where you can finish this, you have to be a little bit loose. Tight with your grip on your shin, but loose with your grip on his body so that you can effectively corkscrew to where your belly button is facing his shoulder. Now, once I'm here, you can see the opportunity for the triangle represents itself. I then take the leg pit of my free leg and wrap that over the shoelace section of my other foot. Now, you can finish the triangle from this position, but most of the time, from my perspective at least, I've seen my opponent roll to their back because it feels safe. Well, guess what they end up in? We're back into the mounted triangle. So you have the triangle, you have the arm bar, but one I haven't covered yet is a really nasty wrist lock. So as you can see here, I grab the end of his hand and I begin to pull his entire arm with putting a bend in his elbow towards my body. I'm effectively wedging his elbow against my torso and then applying downward and inward pressure on his hand because that puts his wrist in a bend, allowing me to achieve the wrist lock. Again, these come on really quick, so be careful because a lot of guys don't have good flexibility in the wrists. If you're rolling with women, you'll probably see that they're harder to wrist lock because they have more range of motion. But some of you guys out there, you have very little, and it's pretty easy to hurt someone doing this. So be nice and careful on your training partner. Obviously, like I always say, in a tournament or a self-defense scenario, full send that bad boy, but be careful on your training partners for sure. And that's my take on the triangle. Now, it is a detail-heavy submission, but if you try to simplify it and learn the movements and create that neural pathway in your mind, eventually you're gonna get to a point where you can just launch this thing without even having to think about it. It just becomes something that you do second nature. And there are a lot of contingency plans that can come off of the triangle. There's a lot of alternate submissions and positions and things that you can do. So I could always do a part 2 on things that you can do with the triangle besides submitting or alternate submissions if you can't finish the triangle, but of course, only if you guys are interested enough in that. So you let me know your thoughts. I'm not the only teacher here, and your guys' comments and information and perspective not only help me, but help everybody else who come through these videos. I always appreciate it. With that, you know how we like to end them, sometimes backwards, always forwards. I'll see you in the next one.